I'm Rob Alway, Editor-in-Chief of Mason County Press, and welcome to the Great Lakes History Log. Today's episode talks about Ida Anderson, who died on the Titanic on her way to Ludington. A small and shiny marker sits at the corner of a family plot at Lakeview Cemetery in Ludington. There actually is no grave for this person. Instead, the marker serves as a memorial for a woman who lost her life in what is the most famous shipwreck in history, the sinking of R.M.S. Titanic. Today's episode is presented by Filer Credit Union with Michigan locations in Manistee, Ludington, Bear Lake, and East Lake, and the Mason County Historical Society, which operates historic White Pine Village, the Port of Ludington Maritime Museum, and the Rose Hawley Archives in downtown Ludington, Michigan. The marker, which includes an outline of the Titanic, is a memorial to Ida Anderson and is a recent addition to Lakeview Cemetery, even though Ida died over 113 years ago. The memorial sits just a few feet away from the grave of Ida's sister Hilda and Hilda's husband Axel A. Johnson Sr. Ida was supposed to marry her widowed brother-in-law, Axel Johnson, which is why she took that faithful journey. Ida Anderson was born November 24, 1873 in Sweden. Her story is intertwined with the story of her sisters, three of whom immigrated to Michigan and ended up in Ludington and Manistee. Those included Hilma Susanna, known in the U.S. as Susanna, who married Otto Peterson and lived in Manistee. Anna Elizabeth, known in the U.S. as Elizabeth, who married August Anderson and lived in Ludington, and Hilda, who married Axel Johnson and also lived in Ludington. Her story is also intertwined with her brother-in-law Axel and his brother Andrew. Andrew and Axel were also born in Sweden, the sons of John Olson and Mary Eriksson. Andrew was born on January 26, 1860, and died on October 17, 1948, in Ludington. Axel was born on February 18, 1863, and died on March 17, 1939, in Ludington. According to Axel Johnson's obituary, published March 18, 1939, in the Ludington Daily News, Andrew and Axel immigrated to the U.S. together in 1881 and came directly to Ludington. However, information from family records say otherwise. Family records show that Axel was working in steel mills in Sweden and left in 1882 around age 19. He apparently did not want to serve in the Swedish military, so he came to the U.S. It is likely that Andrew and Axel traveled together on their journey from Sweden and probably lived together in the U.S., first living in Vermont and then coming to Ludington. Axel worked in stone quarries in Vermont until 1884, when he came to Ludington, where he worked for Stearns Lumber Company. In 1886, both Andrew and Axel petitioned to become naturalized U.S. citizens. The Johnson brothers established a lumber mill at Hamlin Lake, and in 1915 began a coal business, Johnson Coal Company, in Ludington. In 1889, Andrew married Elizabeth Peterson in Ludington. They had 3 children. Elizabeth died in 1907. On August 26, 1890, Axel married Hilda Marie Anderson, sister of Ida Anderson, in Ludington. They had 7 children. Hilda died on March 7, 1909. The cause of death was hemorrhaging, according to her death certificate at the Mason County Clerk's office. Most family accounts state she died in childbirth. Records at the Mason County Clerk's office do not show a death of a baby, but that isn't necessarily unusual for that time. Ida's story. Travel records indicate that Ida had visited the U.S. when she was 19 years old. She left Sweden in May 1893 and returned in June 1894. At that time, it's likely she would have met her brother-in-law Axel and his brother Andrew. In the 1890s, records indicate that she was working as a maid for a photographer in Sweden. On November 25, 1910, she moved to another city where she was employed as a housekeeper. According to Dr. Axel Johnson III, grandson of Axel Sr. and Hilda, following his wife's death, Andrew Johnson wanted to marry Ida. However, she wasn't interested in him. Following Elizabeth's death, Hilda and Axel took care of Andrew's 3 children, which meant when Hilda died, there were 10 children in the household, ranging in ages from 3 to 18, with no mother. Apparently, Ida was more willing to marry Axel rather than his brother, but it took 3 years for her to leave Sweden. A letter written in the 1950s by Esther Anderson of Ludington, the daughter of Elizabeth Anderson, sister of Hilda and Ida, confirmed Ida's intentions. Grandmother's sister had been in this country before. Andrew sought her, but she didn't want to marry him. After Axel's first wife died, she was on her way back to U.S. to marry Axel and went down on the Titanic. The R.M.S. Titanic was laid down on March 31, 1909 at Harland and Wolff Shipyard in Belfast, Northern Ireland, for the White Star Line, and launched on May 31, 1911. She was completed on April 2, 1912. The ship was 882 feet 9 inches long, 92 feet 6 inches wide, 175 feet high, with a draft of 34 feet 7 inches. She operated with 24 double-ended and 5 single-ended boilers, feeding two 30-feet tall triple-expansion reciprocating steam engines operating the two wing propellers and a low-pressure Parsons turbine for the center propeller. The engine's output was 46,000 horsepower. She could operate at 21 knots, which is 24 miles per hour, and had a capacity of 2,453 passengers and 874 crew, a total of 3,327 people. She was equipped with 20 lifeboats, sufficient for 1,178 people. The name Titanic, hull number 401, derives from the Titans of Greek mythology. The Titanic was the second of 3 Olympic-class ocean liners. The first, the Olympic, hull number 400, began operating on June 14, 1911, and operated until April 12, 1935. The third ship, HMHS Britannic, hull number 433, began service on December 23, 1915, and was sunk by a German naval mine in the Aegean Sea on November 21, 1916. Britannic was the largest ship lost in World War I. The sinking cost the lives of 30 people of the 1,066 people on board. The British White Star Line had a fleet of 29 steamers and tenders in 1912. Its parent company was International Mercantile Marine Company, which was controlled by American financier J.P. Morgan. The 3 ships had first-class accommodations that included a gymnasium, swimming pool, smoking rooms, restaurants and cafes, and a Turkish bath. The Titanic's captain was Edward John Smith. Smith joined the White Star Line as an officer in 1880. Though the Titanic's home port was Liverpool, England, which was the location of the White Star Line's home office, the company also operated out of Southampton, England, which is where she would depart on her maiden voyage. On that maiden voyage, Titanic had 1,317 passengers, 324 in first class, 284 in second class, and 709 in third class. There were 869 males and 447 females, which included 107 children. The ship could have accommodated many more passengers, but a national coal strike in the United Kingdom caused disruptions to shipping schedules in the spring of 1912, which caused many crossings to be canceled. Many would-be passengers chose to postpone their travel plans until the strike was over. The strike finished a few days before the Titanic set sail. The Titanic left Southampton at noon on April 10, 1912. She then traveled 89 miles across the English Channel to the French port of Cherbourg, within 4 hours of leaving Southampton. At 11:30 a.m. on Thursday, April 11th, Titanic arrived at Cork Harbor on the south coast of Ireland, near the port city of Queenstown, now Cobh. She departed at 1:30 p.m. The ship was scheduled to arrive at Pier 59 in New York City on the morning of April 17, 1912. At 11:40 p.m. on April 14, 1912, about 2,070 miles into her 3,320-mile journey, lookout Frederick Fleet spotted an iceberg immediately ahead of the ship and alerted the bridge. First Officer William Murdoch ordered the ship to be steered around the iceberg and the engines to be reversed, but it was too late. The starboard side of the Titanic struck the iceberg, creating a series of holes below the waterline. The hull was not punctured, but rather dented, such that the steel plates of the hull buckled and separated, allowing water to rush in. 5 of the 16 watertight compartments were heavily breached, and a 6th was slightly compromised. It soon became clear that the Titanic would sink, as the ship would not remain afloat with more than 4 compartments flooded. She began sinking bow first, with water spilling from compartment to compartment over the top of each watertight bulkhead as the ship's angle in the water became steeper. Between 2:10 and 2:15 a.m., a little over 2.5 hours after the ship struck the iceberg, the rate of sinking suddenly increased as the boat deck dipped underwater, and the sea poured in through open hatches and grates. following which electrical supply on board stopped after the circuit breakers tripped and the lights flickered and went out. As the ship's unsupported stern rose out of the water, exposing the propellers, the ship broke in two main pieces between the second and third funnels due to the immense forces on the keel. With the bow underwater and air trapped in the stern remained afloat and buoyant for a few minutes longer, rising to a nearly vertical angle and hundreds of people still clinging to it before foundering at 2:20 a.m. Of the estimated 2,224 people on board the ship, 1,634 died, making it one of the deadliest peacetime maritime disasters in history. Among the dead was 38-year-old Ida Anderson. Ida had boarded the ship as a third-class passenger in Southampton. White Star Line records showed that Ida's destination was Manistee, where she would initially have stayed with her sister Susanna Peterson. Just days after the tragedy, Ida's fate was unknown. The Thursday, April 18, 1912 edition of the Ludington Record-Appeal ran a story on its front page stating that her fate was unknown and that family members had been unable to obtain information. The April 21, 1912 edition of the Manistee Daily News expressed doubt about Ida's survival. The headline read, "No word is received of Mrs. Peterson's sister. Miss Ida Anderson, bound for Manistee, may be one of 1,595 lost when Titanic went to the bottom of Atlantic." 2 days later, on April 23, 1912, the Manistee Daily News reported Ida was alive, with the headline reading, "Miss Ida Anderson is one of Titanic's survivors. Daily News receives information through United Press Association that sister of Manistee woman feared dead is saved." On Wednesday, April 24, 1912, the Ludington Chronicle also reported Ida was alive. But apparently the UPI officials had found another person by the name of Ida Anderson. The April 24, 1912 Manistee Daily News stated that the White Star Line reported that it actually had no record of Ida Anderson purchasing a ticket. Later, it was revealed that the White Star Line had recorded Ida's name as Ida Augusta rather than Ida Anderson. It was confirmed that she had indeed been among the dead. The children of Axel Johnson and Andrew Johnson grew up without mothers, and their hopes of a new mother were crushed following Ida's death. However, the legacy of the first generation and preceding has had lasting effects on Ludington and Mason County. Among those is Dr. Axel Johnson III, whose career has included serving as Assistant Superintendent of Ludington Area School District, a successful psychiatrist, and as a Brigadier General in the U.S. Army Reserves. Dr. Johnson has spent over 3 decades researching Ida Anderson and keeping her memory alive, which is why he purchased a memorial marker in her memory and had it placed at the family plot at Lakeview Cemetery in Ludington. "I felt she needed to be remembered," he said. Thank you for listening to the Great Lakes History Log, presented by Filer Credit Union and the Mason County Historical Society. This podcast is a production of Salvo Points Media, a nonprofit news and information service in partnership with Media Group 31 and the Mason County Press. This podcast was written by me, Rob Allway, and is copyrighted.